Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Siggins. I work as a consultant with CPOC and been helping with this conference for the last few years. So very, very excited to see all of you at this session. We've got a great turnout, so thank you. We would love to invite everyone to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Just let us know what county you work for. If you want to put your role in, that would be great. We're definitely planning for an interactive session today, so really glad to have you here. This breakout group, macro to micro, is a perfect follow-up to this morning's discussion around Families First, where we were able to talk more about prevention than we sometimes get to, and that's definitely the focus of our session today. This is the brainchild of Chief Samuel Leach from Calaveras County and Paul Vinetz, the Bureau Chief from Los Angeles Probation Department. And so I'm actually going to turn this over to them. I will be around to help as needed with questions and answers, but very much looking forward to the session. Paul, I'm going to toss it to you first.
Okay, and hi everybody, and welcome, and very thankful to be here with everybody here today. It's a really great sized group. Before I launch into any kind of introductions of my own, I did want to send special thanks to our partners from the Chief Probation Officers of California, for Elizabeth Siggins for being here with us today, to Salema, who is not here but behind the scenes, to Stephanie Anderson, is an amazing group of people behind all of this, Rosie McCool. There's just a lot of support, and it takes a huge effort, whether it's in person or virtual, to put something like this together. So I did want to say thank you to everybody who helped put this together, and to Samantha, who's also behind the scenes and did the brief introductions and housekeeping. So thanks to all of you. My name is Paul Vinetz. I'm a Bureau Chief with Los Angeles County Probation. Please call me Paul. And I've been with Los Angeles County for over 35 years now. It is not easy for me to say that out loud because I never think about it. I think about it, I don't say it out loud, but 35 years I've been responsible for probation's placement and child welfare for the past 3 years, but spent almost the entirety of my time working with young people, with juvenile probationers and families and communities. So when Sam reached out to me to join him, and when CPOC reached out to me to participate in this presentation, all of this hits very near and dear to my heart. And you'll hear me probably say this a little bit later on, but we need to match our hearts and our brains to get this job done. There's just as much heart that goes into helping a young person as there does brain, or you'll hear later art and science. But we're going to be talking about some universal and big principles, some proven strategies that we can look at when we're working in our complex environments. We have a lot of common ground, whether you're a large macro county or you're a very small rural county or just a small county. We have a lot of common ground because these are our kids, these are our families, and these are our communities. I could talk about comparing and contrasting the scale of our counties. That speaks for itself. But at the end of the day, we're each working with one kid, one family at a time, and trying to help them overcome whatever it is that brought them to us. In our county, we've had a 90% decrease in the, well over 90% decrease in the number of kids that in our placements and our juvenile halls and our camps. And I'm pretty sure your counties are experiencing the same. But we still have our challenges in Los Angeles County. We have the 5th or 6th largest child welfare department in the state of California. So we have to, put all these pieces together. And we are looking forward to your participation and your input, contributions during today's session. And with that, thank you. And I'll pass it over to Chief Samuel Leach from Calaveras County, but I will pass it over to Sam. So thank you.
Hey everyone, Sam, I want to give a second to Kelli Whittle and Jeannette Miller, who are two of our Deputy Probation Officer 3s here in Calaveras County. And they're a big part of the reason why we agreed to do today's presentation, because frankly, they're just incredibly advanced and have a lot of line level perspective, advanced line level perspective on what placement looks like today. So for, Paul, who's been in the business 35 years, and me being around for 25, at least in the congregate care sense, things look a lot different than they did that long ago. And so I love having the perspective of, some of our experienced line officers who are still doing the real work and the direct work with the kids. And these are just two people that I'm honored to work with and super proud of. So Jeannette and Kelli, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kelli Whittle. I'm a DPO3 here with Calaveras County. I've been with this department for 7 years this month, a DPO for 6 years, and I started off as a probation aide. In my time here in this department, I've done multiple different jobs. I've been in juveniles, adult court. I'm currently the AB 109 Pure CS Deputy Probation Officer. I'm a firearms instructor with our department. I'm a trainer in motivational interviewing with our department, and I'm also the person that people call on when they need to do family finding with juveniles.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeannette Miller. I'm also a Deputy Probation Officer here. I've been working with Calaveras for 6 years. Before that, I worked in placement for 5 years, and something that I really like about that is I felt like I was working in the trenches with these kids, and that's when my case planning journey kind of started. And I was able to learn at that level and then be able to transition it to working in probation, doing case planning with not only juveniles, but adults as well.
Thank you both. I appreciate you being here. I guess my introductory story has been knocked off a little off balance when I started looking at the who's who list on the right and all of these people checking in, because I'm definitely having imposter syndrome when I start to see some of the names and knowing how long you guys have been around and that a lot of you have mentored me. So I won't name you guys individually, but pretty cool to see some old friends, especially after COVID. When I was preparing an introduction for where we're at today with this presentation, I thought back to our journey and the lessons of the past, right? Just things that we've learned along the way and how important those are to where we're at in the present, and still continuing to implement continuum of care reform, but also from a bigger picture of what was the spirit of AB 403 and CCR. And, where do we go from here? So I think the past really helps us frame that. And I always, those of you that know me know how important contrast is to me. So I want to start with a story from when I first got hired in 1996. I was finishing college, and I got hired by a group home down in Southern California in Orange County. And that was before they had changed the foster care regulations. So our populations tended to be age 2 to age 6. And it was an RCL 12 dependency group home. And, at that time, here I am, I'm a college kid about to turn 21 at the time. And, how much training had I had in complex trauma? I'd never even changed a diaper. I didn't even have siblings. It's probably why I'm such a narcissist. I was brought up an only child. But I hadn't spent time around even just normal kids in like a healthy setting. And I get hired to take care of kids age 2 to 6 in a level 12, which frankly, I always like to say this, but how much damage has to be done for a 3-year-old to end up in a level 12 group home? And I know we're done with the RCL system in a sense, and things look a little different now than they did then. But I learned so much from these early years. And the story that I want to set the tone for to frame things today is when I first started, there was a kid named JJ that was coming into the home right around the time that I had started, just after I started working there. And so here I am, a 21-year-old kid, and there's a 3.5, about to turn 4-year-old kid named JJ. And JJ had just a very infectious smile and an incredible imagination. You know, most kids that are, you know, hitting 4, you know, they can start to distinguish pretty well between what is pretend and what is real. You know, it's very different than, you know, a 1.5-year-old. So normally if you're hitting 4, you know, okay, it's time to be serious. This is not make-believe time. And then there's a time for play. For JJ, he wasn't at that point. He'd never really sat at a table or used a fork or a spoon. He had no idea how to do that, and he ate with his hands. I have no idea when he had last seen either of his parents or who he was living with before he got to us, because we weren't privy to that information. His speech was really, really delayed, to the point where most of the other kids could not understand what JJ was saying. So how many risk factors are we hearing already, right? When you think in terms of developmental delays and attachment, and attachment is so much, right? You know, early childhood attachment, once that's taken away from us in a situation like JJ's, you know, how do you solve that? Do you send him to live in a group home with a 21-year-old with very little training? I mean, you can see why I use this to set contrast, right? But JJ and I began to get very close. He was, because of his imagination, one of my big jobs was to crawl around on the floor with him. And he was obsessed with Disney, you know, I mean, who isn't? But he's obsessed with Disney, and The Lion King was his favorite movie. It was around that time. And so he would be Simba and I would be Mufasa. And we'd crawl around on the floor together, like the Disney lions. And that could just never stop for him. I mean, that was his world, right? Snapping him from there into reality, like it's bath time, or it's, you know, it's time to go learn something, or it's time to sit at the table with the other kids. He didn't want to do any of that. And frankly, if any of us was in JJ's situation, would we want to be in reality, or would we want to stay in playtime and pretend time? So, I mean, not only is it developmentally appropriate for most 3.5, 4-year-olds to want to, you know, do the pretend play all the time, but when you come from a much scarier reality, as JJ did, you know, it's really easy to kind of wrap your head around what complex trauma does for these kids, and then set the tone for, okay, now what can we do about it? Because frankly, I don't think any amount of crawling around on the floor was going to fix JJ, but that wasn't important at the time. My job was to connect with him and just help him at least work to the point where he would be adoptable to somebody, right? And we did, and I'll skip through a lot of details and that kind of thing, but you know, we spent a couple of years together that I was working there. And I remember at some point, you know, by now I've graduated college and I want to go get a job. I ended up going to Riverside County Probation. I see we have a few Riverside folks. And that was my first job in the probation business. But when I left the group home, JJ was still there. And the most important adult in his life was me. And it made a huge impression. One part I left out is I supervised one visit for JJ in the few years that I knew him. His mother never came. He didn't have a CASA worker. He didn't have any kind of pro-social support of others or mentors or anything like that. And his father came once and was incredibly disinterested in seeing him, and mostly spent his time trying to talk to me. So when I left Riverside, or I'm sorry, when I left to go to Riverside Probation, just imagine the guilt I felt about this transition. At the same time, it's a lesson learned for me to always frame who cares about the kids that we're working with and who is not getting paid to care about them. Because that's one of the biggest parts in a framework that I think we always need to say. And those of you that have been in a training with me, I guarantee you've heard me say that before. Who cares about the kid who's pro-social and isn't getting paid to care about them? That's a big part of any system. And I think JJ is a small part of the inspiration for that, because when I left, I just knew did I help improve his chances? I mean, I don't think I made him any worse. Did I work with him? Did he end up being better off for having been around me? Well, hopefully, at least hopefully he learned to attach to something, but then it ultimately becomes another trauma. And there's a reason we don't raise 2 to 6 year olds in group homes anymore, right? And there's a reason that we go straight to, how do we get them a family? There's a reason that we're so much more placement avoidant today when we think in terms of congregate care than we were back then. So that's the story I wanted to use to frame the start of the day, because I think it'll help us as we navigate through the big picture ideas. All right. Jeannette and Kelly, Paul, did I leave anything out? Do you have any thoughts on what I just said before I move into our 6 big picture ideas that we want to make sure we cover today?
Sam, I don't really have anything, but you talked about 2 very important things: complex trauma, and you talked about early childhood development and how those dependent youth work their way into the delinquency system. And I think that's going to be probably one of your major themes here as you move forward. So I want to highlight the importance of complex needs and how kids move that with mental health and experience in the dependent systems find their way to our system. And I think that's going to be a large part of our discussion here today.
I appreciate that. Look, we have dozens of counties attending here, and watch how quiet the chat gets. So chime in if you have more kids in placement today than you did 20 years ago. I mean, I could sit here for the next hour and a half, right? And it's not going to go up. The changes have happened statewide, hopefully nationwide. I don't pay too much attention to that. But the changes happen for a reason. And feel free to put your thoughts in the side box. Like, why is that? Is it because we passed, AB 403? Is it only because the rules changed? Because the counties I worked in, I've worked for 3, sorry, I didn't even bio myself, but I worked for Riverside, Sutter, and Calaveras. And I can tell you that in all of those counties and in the dozens of counties that I've done consulting and training with over the years, the story is very similar in all of them. We've all worked incredibly hard to learn about what doesn't work and frankly, how wide our net became. In the sense of we really tried to protect kids from themselves and stepped in as that agency when some of the other agencies either weren't willing or weren't able to support the kids that were coming into the probation system. So the very first systemic big picture idea that we have for reducing kids in placement is to use a strategically narrow net. We get accused of net widening all the time. And I think from an outsider's perspective, somebody who's never worked in the system or felt the things that we've all felt as professionals, putting our heart and soul on the line to try to make a difference in people's lives. A wide net looks like, well, it's the government and they just want to keep their jobs. Job security. What else have you guys been accused of? Put it in the chat. But some of these things that just sound as if, that's what we're trying to do. And meanwhile, the true story, you guys just painted it for me with silence. The true story is over the past 20 plus years, we've done nothing but reduce in juvenile incarceration rates, juvenile probation rates, juvenile wardship rates, juvenile placement rates, juvenile DJJ commitments, substantially. And like Paul said, 90% in LA, more than 90%. And I think that's pretty common of a lot of counties, that it's 75% or more reduction in congregate care placements. So why is that? And what are the things we did? And I believe it starts with, number one, using a strategically narrow net. What does your intake screening process look like? And I don't mean for your placement unit. I mean the very front gate control. What does your front gate control look like? And how do we screen kids out of the system today versus what we used to do? And how could that continue to improve moving forward? Paul, I'm going to let you jump in there. What does that look like in Los Angeles today? And how do you have screenings so that complex trauma is not criminality?
So just based on the size of what it is that we do, the numbers speak for themselves. Those numbers are way down, and we have far more resources. Let me just put it this way. We know a whole lot more about what we do than we did 5, 10, 15, 2020. We know more over time. We know more about ourselves. We know more about our profession, and we know what works. And we have a lot more resources, dedicated resources to help us. I mean, when I started, I was telling Sam the other day, I had nothing. I had to be a hunter and gatherer of resources to try and find things out. And unfortunately, the system was designed that our default treatment program, like many county jails do, are the largest mental health treatment centers in counties. Our juvenile halls were, or our camps or our placements were the treatment facilities. We didn't have at that point the commitment of resources to help keep kids in the home. And the state, California does tend to lead the country, and we put things in place besides, if you're a waiver county, the things that we could have achieved, the things we achieved through the Title IV waiver dollars, but prevention services and a commitment to prevention, which is really what, intrigued me about joining this call, is what are we doing to prevent kids from going into the, further into the delinquency system? So because a kid family is impoverished, because a kid is the victim of abuse, neglect, or abandonment, because they have mental health issues or developmental delays, doesn't mean we have to play the heavy role. It doesn't mean we need to criminalize kids and sink them deeper into our system after they've spent probably much of their young lives in the dependency system. And like was said earlier by Sam, we're not here to fix kids or repair kids. It's more like what we can do for them than what we can do to them. And that's where we are now, is what we can do to aid and assist these kids. So I'll leave it there. So. And it's Kelly and Jeannette. Yeah, sorry, Kelly and Jeannette, please.
Paul, just to kind of emphasize what you were saying about just digging them kind of into their hole, it's easy once you put kids in the system for them to go deeper and deeper. So for us, our screening process, it takes a lot to even enter the probation process at this point. It takes violence, it takes repeated behaviors. I think kids that we used to automatically put in and refer to the DA's office or bring them in, we're being a lot more selective now. And I think we're setting expectations with schools, with counselors, with parents a lot higher. We're not here to parent. Just a quick story, we had, a kid and she danced out of school the other day. And so the school called, well, you guys, she's a ward, she needs to be arrested. We're like, well, is dancing out of school, that's bad, but is it criminal? So, we're trying to just take a step back, not be reactive, and really be a lot pickier and look for those criminal behaviors versus just, bratty kids.
Typical teenage behaviors that we once were putting in the system that we're trying to keep out of now.
Hey, can I just add one thing, Sam, really quick, is that, and I should have said this in terms of our screening process in Los Angeles, is that we divert a vast majority of our kids away from the system. Okay, we have a lot of alternatives that do not lead to petition filings. And that's a major commitment that we've made, at least on our end. So I just did not want to neglect to say that.
So I think every county, just to finish up with the first big picture idea, which is to use a strategically narrow net. I think, do you have objective screening tools and diagnostic tools, kind of the scientific part of who really belongs here versus who's assessing for other things? And I believe that all of our counties do at this point, but that's, it's something that can always use improvement. We can always be improving our fidelity to our assessment tools. And frankly, making sure that we are not what we used to be, which was a catch-all to kids that didn't quite fit into the other systems, like maybe they didn't quite meet the criteria to be in behavioral health or child welfare or one of the other systems, but we were the one system that felt obligated to work with this specific kid. So we were going to take them and then just do the best we could. And it's not to say that we don't still have cases that sound like that, but I think that percentage has gotten so much smaller over the years because frankly, we work harder to have good objective screening tools at every phase of the system.
Chief, you have a question. Oh, there's a question in the chat about how have you been able to bring your justice and law enforcement partners into that mindset? How have you had to deal with resistance from them?
Yeah, I think all of us that go through this, yes, we faced resistance. And to complement your question before I fully answer it, I also want to say that it often surprises me when behavioral health or child welfare or the schools, counselors, I mean, expect that we're going to hold kids accountable all the time for everything. Like somehow our whole role is to sit here until we get a call from a frustrated counselor to then go arrest somebody. So sometimes, you know, one of the things I like to tell the staff is I expect you to have more empathy and compassion than even the best social workers. Like that's the way we train here. And at the same time, for Calaveras, look, we're a small county. We have 16 sworn officers for our whole county. We have no detention center. We're very small, right? That's part of why we partnered with LA for this, so you could get a couple different perspectives. We know all of our cops. You know, Whittle, Kelli was out last night with a fleeing felon. Sorry, Kelli. But we, you know, she's doing AB 109 and now she's on here doing a CCR presentation. We're very close to the cops that we work with here. We're an armed department. Our MI instructor is also a firearms instructor. Some of you probably have a hard time wrapping your head around that. Same with case planning. We build both extremes. We have the empathy and compassion that we expect from social workers and behavioral health officers, and we're as prepared for field safety issues as our street cops are. And we train to both extremes, and we do a lot of role clarification with the folks, with our stakeholders. So that works for us. And frankly, I don't think that works in every county because I think there's just a lot of differences. But role clarification is big. I think there is a lot of time that goes into that. Was it Lisa? Yeah, Lisa, who originally asked the question. Role clarification, honesty, connection with your stakeholders, and then just being open. I mean, it's about relationships, really. The relationships are good at the top and at mid-management, all the way down to line level, then, you know, they're going to understand how your role is different than their role. But yes, very common. What else? Because I can't read and speak at the same time. So Kelli, do you want to build on what I just said? Or Paul, do you want to jump in from the LA perspective and answer?
Yeah, you know, just a couple of things. The relation, you know, we have 88 independent cities in Los Angeles County, the city of LA being the biggest. We have lots of stakeholders on the law enforcement side. I would also want to include in that mix our district attorney, as well as our defense counsel, and you know, there's other stakeholders. But when it comes to working directly with cops, we have to work together very, very closely to get them to, what's the right way of saying this, come into our way of thinking. It takes time, and you start with a few, and you start with the leadership, and then you start a culture shift, as it were. And I know there must be somebody out there from San Francisco Juvenile, and one of the things that impressed me the most is what San Francisco did with their the car through Huckleberry House, where first time, and I don't know if they still do this, but you know, this is, you know, a place where the cops would take first time offenders, if I understood it correctly, and to a nonprofit organization, to a community-based provider, to screen those kids out of the system. And the way I understood it, you know, going back a few years, not that long, is that it took a while for law enforcement to catch on to that. We've worked very, very closely, and we're fortunate that the chief of LAPD, who I've known for a really long time, is a true believer in this. So it's not the leadership that perhaps is the main thing, but I've worked out of police stations where the cops' attitude might be, a full jail is a happy jail. So we have to, really continue that work with those law enforcement partners to help them understand, some of the issues we're facing. Kelli, Jeannette.
I think just to go along with that, and Lisa, your question of how we've been able to bring our law enforcement partners in that is really just collaboration and communication with them. The more that we're speaking to them about certain incidents that have happened in the past and how can we do that differently the next time that this thing comes around again, and what specific protocols can we have and what can we do to partner together is really how we've been able to just move forward. And that kind of communication is just working together as a team and seeing how we can keep kids out of the system and bringing our deputies' mindsets to that as well.
Thank you. I was trying to type and listen at the same time and get that thought in there, and you beat me to the buzzer a little bit, so sorry about that. Okay, so number one, use a strategically narrow net. Number two, take a holistic approach to case planning. This probably doesn't come as a big surprise. I see Donya Thompson's in here and Chelsea Chappelle and some of my other just longtime friends, Eric Olson and Moran. Some of you guys know me pretty well, and I'm not going to get very far through a presentation before I start talking case planning, right? Now, by case plans, I don't mean what Title 4E expects us to do. Look, that's fine for those of you that are not waiver counties. Obviously, there's technical, mechanical, compliance issues related to 4E. That's not what this training is. When I talk about holistic case planning, I mean, going back to what Paul very briefly mentioned earlier, which is, are we working with our kids or on them? Are we able to step outside of our system and view what the kid's life looks like outside of our system? And I think that level of compassion and strategic focus is still somewhat rare. It's one of the reasons that I'll pick on Jeannette here, Jeannette Miller, because I think Jeannette has been just a shining star with regard to this, where with her and Kelli specifically, I will have officers working with a kid who then get to the point where pretty quickly they're saying, look, there's nowhere for this kid to go. This kid doesn't have anybody, there's nowhere for them to go, X, Y, and Z, every reason why it's time to make a placement recommendation, right? And most of that, I hate to say it, call me out, we can have an argument here, but a lot of it comes from a lack of creativity and a lack of willingness to take a deep dive with the empathy. So when we place, if we have to place a kid here in Calaveras, and it's a tough day. Like, Jeannette, help me out here. What's it look like before? I mean, what kind of case planning, holistic case planning processes do you have in place to work with a kid before we even start talking about placement? Like, what does that look like? How do you bring a kid in for the first time at intake? I'm not talking about a placement screening committee or anything like that. I'm talking about the moment they hit the door, what kind of case planning are you doing with them? And then Kelli, when she's done, I want you to talk about family engagement, family finding.
So I think the hardest part about explaining Calaveras case planning is when people hear the word case plan, they think of, some kind of assessment, auto-populated, printout that you go over. It's got a bunch of big words. The kid's looking at you like they have no idea what you're talking about. So just take that and you got to just wipe it off the table. Our case planning, a kid comes in for the first time. We have a piece of paper. It's pretty simple. And we're just asking them, what do you want to see in life right now? What do you want? Who do you want to be around you? What do you want your school situation to be? Who's important to you? And we do that through motivational interviewing to where it's a conversation. It's not this, process that is stiff. It's very organic. And really in our county placement, we don't even consider it an option. Like if you were to be like, oh, well, we might have to think of placement for this kid, like, no, we got to figure out something else. And it kind of goes into the family finding of hopefully before placement is even brought up, we've already met with the family to figure out who are all these people in their lives. When I did work in placement, I learned the hard way that when you just focus on education goals and you don't think about the kid's life as a whole, nothing's going to change. You might have them all registered for a community college. You might have them, set up in an after school program. But if you don't have that whole picture, it's all for nothing. So for us, we look at the whole picture and then everything else is just a bonus in that.
I think that goes into family finding as well as looking at the whole picture, starting with when the child was born up until the age that they're coming into our system. Who are those organic people that have been in their lives? A coach, a teacher, a neighbor, a family friend, somebody that's been there that would be willing to not even necessarily take the kid, but be a supportive person in their life while they're going through this journey, whatever that may be. And just going through the life step by step of the kid and trying to figure out who are those organic people that'll be there when the system's gone.
So I think to some extent, one of the things I like to say is, again, work with the kids, not on them. What does your case planning process look like? Are you helping the kids build better lives? Are you looking at their lives in their entirety and trying to connect them to pro-social others? Are you helping them build social capital? Are your juvenile field people connecting with the kids in a way where if they're at imminent risk of placement, let's say, is the PO the most important person in that kid's life? That should not be the case. And it's okay if it's for a short period of time, but we meet a lot of kids who their most positive pro-social adult in their life is their PO or their therapist and that kind of stuff. So how are you working with the kids to help them build social capital, pro-social support of others who are not getting paid to care about them? And how are you engaging the family members to improve and grow and build themselves? For family members that have either become detached or that are struggling with their own issues, what kind of programs do you have going for them? And then frankly, what sense of agency does the kid have and sense of control over the world and those kind of things? So those are all important concepts. I'm trying to cover it pretty quickly for just help you wrap your head around what does holistic case planning mean. It's thinking about their lives, not just what program referrals and the old kind of outmoded broker of service model. Paul, Calaveras has been on the clock for a little while, so I think it's time to pass to you and say, what is your approach to case management and how does it look more holistic today than maybe it did in years past? What wisdom do you have to offer us from the LA perspective?
I'm going to start with this. I'm going to start with the fact that we need to, and I appreciate your comments and also the heartfelt wisdom of Kelli and Jeannette. And what I want to say here is very basic stuff. One of the takeaways from today's session should be know the kid's story, know the family story, okay? There's a lot, and we're getting into this, and I think Sam is going to get to it a little bit more about the balance between evidence-based practices and the human element here. And the case planning, if you're doing an assessment and you know that there's risk factors and there's protective factors and you get a little you go through and some of them are static and some of them are dynamic and you're getting an idea of what that is. I try to equate that because we keep saying evidence-based practices because we develop all of this on a medical model. So when you go to the doctor, the doctor's going to take your temperature, take your blood pressure. The doctor's going to do an assessment. He's going to find out some things about you, blood work, whatever. And that's one thing. The doctor's going to have information. Or as we talked about it before, whatever your assessment is a framework. Okay, you have a frame, and within that frame, you're gonna, have a lot of, you're gonna have the ability and the time to tell that, to not only know that kid's story, but to tell that kid's story, to develop a case plan that is unique to that kid's situation and circumstances. So knowing the kid is a huge piece. That engagement, motivational interviewing isn't something we should be lifting our noses at, because the more we can learn about somebody and their willingness to share what's going on in their lives is, it's priceless when it comes to us being able to develop that plan and then see somebody achieve that plan or get well or get better, which is something that the doctor wants to see. And all of us should want to see the same thing, as people getting better and not finding themselves deeper and deeper into the criminal justice system. So that's just my take on it. And Sam, can I take a moment to talk about one of the things I saw in the chat? And I think this was from Marianne. Marianne is from, I don't know where Marianne is from, Santa Cruz? Monterey? Where are you from, Marianne? Oh, you're on mute. I'm sorry, I can't unmute you. So, Merced, okay, love Merced. So one of the things that she mentioned was 241.1 and the opportunity to work with our behavioral health and child welfare agencies on a multidisciplinary team. And some counties are and some counties are not dual jurisdiction or dual supervision counties, but still working together to keep the, whenever possible, to keep that kid in the home with services is going to be a win every time. So I wanted to acknowledge that you made that comment, Marianne, on 241.1, because it's critical, and the more we know about it and utilize that, and not be shy of making a recommendation that, one way or another, the kid should be in the delinquency system and will benefit from that, or will benefit more from staying in the dependency system. Or they need mental health services. We need to case plan around that kid's specific issues. I don't have much else there, so I'll pass it back over to you. I hope if anybody has any questions on what I commented on, and I'm happy to hear it.
It occurs to me there is this great discussion going on in the chat, and we're recording these sessions, so people who couldn't come today will see that, but we're not, the chat is actually not going to be recorded. So I thought periodically thanks for doing that, Paul, we should be sort of commenting on some of the discussion in the chat. And so maybe if either of you could just talk briefly, because there has been some question back and forth about, well, what about juvenile sex offenders? And is that when you're talking about these really low numbers on placement, are you also talking about youth who have been adjudicated sex offenses?
Yeah, that's an important point. And I think for a lot of us, and it's Marianne, I think was the one from Merced, but your numbers are really low. Your placement numbers are really low too, just like the rest of us. So I think, look, we have to understand that like perfection is a nice idea, but sometimes it's also the enemy of progress, and we really have made just a ton of progress. The idea is to not have kids in placement who don't need to be in placement, and to build services in a holistic case planning model and the narrow net by screening people properly and that kind of stuff. But we still have some kids who are going to end up needing to go to placement. And if you tell me, well, the only kids we're placing tend to be juvenile sex offenders, I think, frankly, that jives with what you would hear from most of the counties. I think that's pretty common. Now, here's the thing. The word of caution I would give to that is, remember, do you have front gate controls? Do you have objective screening criteria at every step of your system? So where does that play in specifically with JSOs? And what I would say is, do you have somebody who is highly specialized, a therapist who's highly specialized, who's evaluating all of those kids before they advance to the point in the court's eyes that they're already going to be sent to placement, right? Do you have a therapist that you work with, or in LA's case, probably hundreds of therapists? I don't know how big it is, but you need people who are well-trained, that you trust, that your court has come to trust, that frankly are very consistent in how they evaluate kids and are qualified to do the testing and treatment. And are they looking at these kids appropriately to guide us? Because contrast that with what it looked like, at least in my early years as a probation officer, where, okay, they committed a 288, there's other kids in the home, what group homes are available? And that's about as much thought as went into it. Yeah, I might be oversimplifying a touch, but it was pretty common. And I think most of you that have been in this business for 15 plus years would probably agree with that. I think we really have to challenge ourselves and question our risk tolerance at times. Because frankly, it's easy to justify, well, we just can't take the risk of having this kid in the community just on the face value. But if you balance that against, yes, but what's the long-term outcomes if we do take this kid out of the home, create another trauma, have them living with other kids in an STRTP, which we know is going to be prolonged with the juvenile sex offender program. So, it's a big question there. And I think the key element is having therapeutic stakeholders that you trust and that can help cross-communicate information with your court stakeholders and with probation and with the district attorney and the public defender's office. I think they need to be considered a part of the system because they're really the ones that are competent and capable to evaluate. So these decisions shouldn't be simply political based on the cultural expectations. They should be also based on therapeutic need and risk, right? And I think a lot of us struggle to find those people. So I think, that's an important part of your system that you need to look at. And because I've had the opportunity to work in several different systems, and sometimes as therapists have come and gone, I have seen that difference firsthand, and it is very significant. So there you go. That's the best I got for you right now. Anything else on that? Paul, I see you unmuting. Jump in.
So I just wanted to say that we're talking about, kids that have complex issues, vulnerability issues, the kids that are committing sex offenses or have fire setting behaviors, probably weren't born that way, and something traumatic, terrible happened to them. So I just want to say that another one of those populations are our CSEC kids, largely a population of girls. And that adds a layer to this that I wanted just to pitch in. So that's a major issue. I don't know if Michelle Guyman is doing a presentation on CSEC at this conference. I know that she has done so in the past. But I think that the issues that Sam is talking about, especially with risk tolerance, is kind of the leap of faith we take when it comes to even utilizing an evidence-based program, rather than locking a kid up, so to speak. Taking a kid away from their home and trusting that a program does what it is designed to do. We use functional family therapy, multi-systemic therapy, wraparound, a number of different programs, along with our motivational interviewing skills. When we put those things in place with connections to positive and pro-social systems or adults or environments, and that kid is able, I think that in the long run, when we trust that that's going to happen, everybody knows when it doesn't work, and that we have to do something about that. And sometimes those results are adverse effects, and we own that, but it doesn't mean that we haven't done what we believed was the right thing to do. That's a big leap of faith for about the 115 or so people that are on this call that have grown in their careers. There's going to be people that have been around for a long time, or people that have been here for a minute that think that all kids are have that attitude that we're safer if we know that they're in custody somewhere. I would appeal to that, to appeal to your heart, that you're, trusting, and they're, just trusting that when you have a program that has demonstrated effectiveness. I'm not here to champion the cause of Ed Latessa. I'm not here to champion, to say that because it's an evidence-based program, practice, or principle, that it's going to be successful. What it really takes is that plus your creativity in your case planning and in your case management and your engagement with the kid as they are, that you're working with them. I mean, Sam mentioned his work with JJ. If you know all of your kids as well as Sam knew JJ, and you're doing your very best by the JJs of this world, you're going to get a much better result in the long run than you otherwise would get.
I see there's a very compelling discussion going on in the chat about the challenges of finding RFAs. So Kelli and Jeannette, were you going to add something?
I was just going to kind of summarize that it seems like a lot of counties are having a hard time finding RFA placements for more serious offenses. One of the examples was like attempted 187, 211. It looks like one county has tried to use more family-based places because a lot of people just aren't willing to take kids with those seriousness of charges.
So, yeah.
And there is a question. Oh.
Yeah, Angel Mendoza from, I think it's Mendocino. Angel, you're from Mendo? Yeah.
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Hey, you got some screen time. Got to get all of you some screen time. I need to shut up. Look, Mendocino, with all due respect, it's an interesting place, right?
It is. It has its advantages, and of course, like any place, or disadvantages.
Yeah, I have spent some time there. I love Mendocino County. But you're still fairly small and rural. You're
Yes.
not quite as small as Calaveras, but not too much bigger either. So here's the thing: when AB 403 was still being debated, and it may seem a little ironic that I'm on this because, frankly, I really didn't support it at the time it was going through. I didn't think it went far enough. That was actually my gripe with it. When you talk about RFA process and looking at recruiting homes just for probation people, from a common sense standpoint, the families that want to get involved in this and have interest in being a resource family, just to be kind of a standalone place, like that might work in the larger jurisdictions where, frankly, it can have, some positive financial aspects to it, right? Like I know the money's not there to help support people living, but realistically, I don't want to go through all of that if I'm just an interested community member, if I might then spend all this time and investment and not get a kid placed with me for 3 years, which is frankly how it is in the rural counties. It's a pretty rare thing to end up having kids sent to you from probation. And because we don't want to net widen, and nor should we, it creates an interesting challenge. And so I don't know that it's a bad thing that the majority of our RFA placements end up being family members or extended family members by definition, right? Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a systemic challenge on our end. And so what I would say is the important parts of your process, if you're thinking lives and not programs, is in the old days, we'd think programs, which congregate care setting or, foster family that's willing to take kids is willing and appropriate for this placement. Nowadays, it's who is this kid going to thrive with? And what gives this kid their best chance? How are we going to, protect the community from harm to some extent, and at the same time, collaborate with the kid on a plan to desist from crime, on a plan to improve the kid's chances of desisting from crime. And I mean, how rare is it that that's not somebody that the kid already admires, even if that person isn't perfect, even if it's a risk challenge to the system to have more risk tolerance than we had 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last week. I mean, I am constantly pushing myself as a chief probation officer to say, can I tolerate the level of risk this is going to happen? And I think a big part of the problem is that America is so risk averse. Here comes the mad scientist rant, Elizabeth, I warned you. America is so risk averse, and California even more so, that we're afraid to take those chances because we perceive that this very damaged and now risky delinquent kid is such a risk to our community that we can't possibly let them live there because I'm going to be liable as chief probation officer. And, you know, the reality is 403 continuum of care reform changed that a little bit. Paul is probably a much better legal thinker than I am. So Paul, feel free to jump in here. But I think it's a really important point that not only has the perception of risk tolerance started to evolve for most of us, maybe all of us, but also from a legal standpoint, you know, we have an obligation to really have a very broad perspective on what is family and to try to keep kids with those family members. So I don't think it's wrong. I just think it's a lot of difficult work for us, right? Angel, I see you nodding along. So why don't
I totally agree with you. I mean, to be honest, when we know that we have a kid coming down with the placement recommendation and we have a family member or a close friend who are willing to step in and say, you know, I will take them in. I think it's probably one of the best kind of situations. It's a win-win situation because yes, we know that they can't be at home with their guardians or parents, but we have another family member who's aware of the family dynamics, is aware of the child's needs, you know, and they understand that they're in the juvenile delinquency system, so they know that there's going to be some risks. However, we talk to them about the probation aspect where, you know, we're not there just for them. We're also there to support the RFA home. You know, I had a grandma take in, you know, her granddaughter, you know, and she was a little skeptical because of the mental health challenges she presented. You know, she became pregnant at some point, and that was even more frustrating. I have another youth in an RFA home right now with a really close friend that he would have otherwise gone to a placement because neither parents were obviously able to have him. And I feel like in the kids that I have placed in RFA homes, you know, we talk about kids we have in placements and we send them off in a different county most often than not, or even out of state. And then we're talking about bringing them back. Well, oftentimes the situation at home doesn't change. So when you have a kid in placement in an RFA home locally, everything is the same. The family dynamics are, you know, everyone is in the town. All the services that they are currently getting in the RFA home are also in their own community. So the transition from an RFA home to back to the parents, if they're able to reunify, you know, at that point, I think it's a smoother transition. And we didn't, that continuum of care continues. So, I mean, I am all for RFA homes. The downside is, of course, everyone knows, is that there aren't enough RFAs. And oftentimes, not only, you know, probation isn't the only one, obviously, there's social services. And like, for instance, one of my kids that I have in an RFA home is in a home that has 300 dependents. So, you know, it's a challenge to have people step up and say, I will take in these challenging kids. I think we could definitely increase in our advertising and try to recruit, you know, how do you recruit? How do you use that buy-in to get families to say, I want to take on this challenge? But I agree, RFA is probably one of the better placements, you know, because you know that everything is here, they're local, the continued care is smoother, you know, you don't have to potentially move to schools, which is another issue. So I agree. I love RFA homes if I can use them.
So I know I was going to defer to you, Paul, but give me a minute here because if it's okay, I'd like to head in another direction. Angel, thank you for your thoughts. I think what you're saying frames small county perspective very well, and especially small county perspective with a lot of heart and compassion and grit and humility, because that's really what it takes to do good work in this space, right? So I appreciate what you're doing out there. And I have so much love for Mendo. I've spent quite a bit of time there, and I'm glad you're there doing that. At the same time, in the comments, I noticed that Shonda chimed in from Sacramento. And Shonda, I would like to welcome you. I'm trying to buy you a couple seconds here to make sure your speaker is going to be ready. Are you willing to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing? Because I think that's fantastic that you guys have built up an inventory in Sacramento. that you've partnered with Daily Solutions. Happy to hear all that. And I think it very much frames where I was going to head with Paul, which is this is a county by county important distinction to make sure that the legislature and the administration, sorry for getting political here, but the governor and the legislature need to understand the importance of leaving us county by county autonomy, because our recipe in Calaveras and Mendocino for we need to be very good at family finding, and we just need to build that out as much as we can, because we know we can't really recruit and retain consistently just RFA homes the way a Sacramento can, where scale is incredibly different, or Los Angeles, who hopefully is doing the same things as SAC. So Shonda, did you hear me? Did I buy you enough time?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to hear you. I think just wanted to hear some of the work that we're doing very briefly. So with the FIPPers, you know, there was a lot of funding that came through FIPPers. We weren't as successful through FIPPers. What we found was the officers themselves were effective versus all of the other media things we tried. I saw one of the comments that said we weren't able to keep our officer. We lost one of those officers, but knowing the work was so valuable and seeing the outcomes we were seeing, we wanted to make sure that we basically shifted our focus and put an officer, funded an officer out of another unit, basically. The work itself is really, I think someone said the work is a lot. I think you need the dedicated officers if you can get them. We've built a lot of collaboration. The two RFA officers we had were going out in the community. They were finding themselves at different events and then just really working with the foster agencies. We also have an agreement with child welfare, so we're doing some collaboration there. This newest, I know there's a documentary, I know Elizabeth, we've been working on a documentary with CPOC about the RFA work and what that looks like and the families. So I'm sorry that it can't be seen today. I don't know when it's going to be out, but it really speaks to all of the work and what that looks like and the dedication. The newest project with the Daily Solutions, I think everyone has seen probably through the announcement through CPOC. Actually, we found a lot of, we're seeing a lot of recruitment out of that. They run like a Facebook type ad. And we're really seeing a lot out of that, and we're still it's a pilot. But our numbers have significantly, we started with 0 to 2 to 3, and we're up to 21 over this course of the last several, years. Just recently out of this work with Daily Solutions, we just have people coming out of the woodwork. And the one thing we did was change the language, and we had the consultant through FIPPers who talked about how we message, because working with youth and parents and families that hear, youth committing these crimes, 211s, whatever that looks like, it was really changing the messaging. Youth who have, juvenile justice experience versus, trying to stay away from the type of crimes. That messaging has been really effective for us, and really spending the time to talk about what probation is, what we do, and how we support them. The feedback that we get from families and the families that we're recruiting and members of the community are about the type of support they get versus what they're seeing from child welfare, which speaks volumes to the expertise that we have in this field of probation and how we do the work. So I think it was Kelli mentioning, or one of them, maybe you were reading some of the comments, but it really does come down to those officers and the type of work we're doing in probation that I think that gets missed in the community on who we are and what we do and how we can support the work. So Chief Leach, I don't know if I answered anything that you said because it was hard to hear you.
I think you were fantastic. Can everybody else hear me okay? Elizabeth, am I coming through good? Yeah? Huh.
Could just be me.
Yeah, who knows? I get to talking to myself in my
Your
head.
volume control.
Yeah, Shonda, I really appreciate your thoughts. That was fantastic. I'll warn you to stay away from Kelli and Jeannette. You cannot steal them. I know we're fairly close to Sacramento, but they're amazing and I can't afford to live without them. What I would like to do is send them to you or maybe bring them to you, and the three of us check out what you guys are doing with RFA recruitments, because even though I still view it as a little unrealistic, with how small we are, county population wise, and as rural as it is, I think it's important to learn from you guys and see what we can steal. Part of how Paul and I started with this design, I think it was Elizabeth's idea. I'm not sure. Paul and I didn't know each other, but somebody thought it would be cool. We were fairly similar and it'd be cool to connect us. And our first conversation, I told Paul, you know, it's kind of like if we were talking about dairy farming, right? And we're like this cute little organic, I don't know if there's anybody from Humboldt here, but I always think of Humboldt Creamery, right? You got this wonderful organic free range cows and all this stuff where, you know, you drive by and they all look happy. Happy cows are from California. And then you've got the industrial, you know, kind of dairy farms where it's like, oh, I hate to see them living like that. You know, and I don't even want to buy that. But the reality is, you know, our little farm can't support everything, right? Like there's not enough milk for everybody if we're doing it our way. And so it's a balance between somewhat of an industrial mechanical approach where we have to worry about things like scale. In Calaveras, we have that luxury that we don't have to do that. And so I think the large counties can learn from us on the micro level of looking at how closely we interact with kids, the extreme measures we go to just absolutely not say yes to agreeing to a placement, like the way that we will wrap around a kid. I've had kids in here that I've been teaching guitar as the chief probation officer. You know, we had a kid that we were trying to not place, and you know, we ended up developing an RFA with her 20-year-old sister, you know, and working with the sister over the course of months and months and months to build her up and put a 20-year-old through parent project class, and, you know, taking the kid on hikes, bonding with the family, like all these kind of things. I'm trying to be like really short with this, but like we will go to extreme creative lengths to work with a kid so that they don't go to placement. The reality is, if I had millions of people living in my county and the scale of juvenile justice that comes with that, I wouldn't be able to operate to that extent. There would be ideas that I can incorporate, but it's different. And on the flip side of that, in Calaveras, we can never be as structurally or mechanically sound as the larger counties are, because we're people dependent. You know, the folks that are doing my placement work, as you're meeting a few of them, you know, they're also range instructors and all kinds of crazy stuff that would just never happen, right, in a larger county. Paul, we cut you off like 15 minutes ago. I'm sure you have some great thoughts here, and then I want to get everybody a break if we can squeeze it in.
So thanks, Sam, and thank you everybody for you know, what you have shared here today. I just really briefly wanted to hit a few points. Well, each point briefly, and that is I had worked directly with Mark Daly and Daily Solutions for the past 3 years. And I'm going to use this opportunity to get slightly political with our friends at CPOC by saying that there is a considerable state budget surplus. Let's just leave it at that. There's a considerable state budget surplus, and that I would offer it would be a great idea, the best idea of the day, to squeeze a little foster parent recruitment and retention funding out of that, some additional FIPPers funds out of that. Our results with Mark Daly have been phenomenal. We started out with focus groups because of just the geography of this county. We were, you know, in many different locations. We learned a lot of things. I'm guessing a lot of that has come to your counties, but our results have been absolutely fantastic, and we're very pleased. We have a dedicated, in LA County, we do have a dedicated unit, our placement permanency and quality assurance unit, but our permanency folks, you know, work on the development and the recruitment and the approvals of all of the resource families. And that is an art form unto itself, but it is, you know, right now, I think we have 23 kids with resource families in Los Angeles County. The big issue, the big ticket item for us right now is upfront family findings. We call it upfront family connections, upfront family findings and engagement, however you want to slice and dice it. When we have a kid that comes in and they are either most likely to be at imminent risk, well, they would be at imminent risk for removal, but you know, we don't think they're going home. They may, you know, we're looking at something else. That's where we have to dig in our heels really hard And it's tough, but that conversation with the families, if you're an investigator, or if you're trying to figure out who that family member is, ask those questions. Get birth certificates, find out who the father is or the mother is, or whoever it is that's not the biological parent if they're not in the picture. Use your LexisNexis, use whatever you need to do to the result. What you'll get from out of that is going to be worth its weight in gold. And I wanted to just talk about, again, since Sam brought it up, we're no factory farm. We can't be a factory farm. We're trying to be, I hate to say it like this, but, think of like non-GMO, organic, down to earth, connected to our communities. It, obviously, I heard Sam's, we called it his bad scientist rant a little while ago. I would be as much a fish out of water in Calaveras as some of you might be in LA. But at the end of the day, this is about one kid and one family at a time. So I've listened in, I've been on a lot of Family First conversations, which, by the way, everybody, if you haven't heard of Family First, it is going to come up and just like, be on top of us in a minute. The work that we do to keep the kids out of the system, preventing them from going in, is critical. So we can find that family member, or a resource family, and put services in place for all of those kids. And I'm going somewhere where I'm not telling you anything you haven't thought of or heard before, because that's why you're here at this conference. You know this stuff. All of us know this stuff already. I've seen mentions in the chat about is it SB 823 and DJJ, and there's another bill called AB 808, which is talking about the development of specialized placements for higher acuity youth. All of this amounts to, in the macro picture, a system that needs to do what it's designed to do, and that is, as peace officers, we're all here to keep our community safe. If there's somebody here that's not down for keeping our community safe, then maybe we can chat, all of us can have a side discussion. But, really what we're here for is to aid and assist these kids and their families. And by that narrow net that Sam was talking about, focusing on what it is that kid needs effectively. Now, upfront family findings, resource family, those alternatives, yeah, they're tiring. Yeah, they're exhausting. They're emotionally draining. And that's what we're called to do. That's what we're here for, is to come up with those solutions. But I do want to, and I don't know if anybody else besides Sam and Elizabeth are from CPOC, but I would suggest that it would be a valuable investment of the taxpayer dollars to consider the extension or expansion of FIPPers in some way, shape, or form. I think that's, the other thing that we talked about, and several of you have mentioned this, is when we put a more high level, more highly, high risk kid or with greater acuity that has, that's in the delinquency side, and we mix that kid with a lower risk kid, we should get an expected result. And this is an evidence-based principle. There's practices, programs, and principles. And the principle is that if we mix high risk and low risk, guess what the low risk are going to do? They're going to become better suited to being, they're going to become higher risk. Okay, if you're going to mix risk levels, especially high and low risk, you're going to get a result that you're not going to want. We're going to make the low risk kids worse. And that's something that we need to be very aware of. When we were on the Family First planning, I heard somebody from, I think it was from Humboldt, mention once about, and this was really important, about the availability of evidence-based programs in their counties. We were talking about the EBPs. And some counties, we're different. That's the one distinct difference, is that we have a developed inventory of several evidence-based programs, and that's going to be real tough, especially when Family First comes online October. and it's going to be an abrupt change. And that's one thing that I'm not hopeful for that part of it, but that we can do some good here and identify the ways that we can work within an imperfect system to continue to deliver services to our kids. Thanks. I know we're getting close to some time here.
Yeah, I'd really like to get a 5-minute break for everybody. I know that's pretty quick, but hey, we're on Zoom. So just to recap, number 1 was use a strategically narrow net for your system. Number 2 is a holistic approach to case planning. And number 3 was think lives, not just programs. You know, if we're brokers of service, that was fine once upon a time. Ultimately, you need to think about what does this kid's life look like outside the system? And how do we work with them in a way that not only helps them exit the system successfully, but not come back to the system? And that's such a different, I mean, hopefully you guys are all coaching something along those lines. Hopefully that's part of your culture. But I can assure you, 20 something years ago, it wasn't. It was really about compliance in the moment. And sometimes compliance is okay in a short-term situation, immediate safety concerns, that kind of stuff. But oftentimes it runs counter to long-term strategic goal setting and long-term strategic growth. Are you focused on compliance in the moment, or are you focused on long-term desistance from crime? And so if you think about it in terms of lives, not just programs, then you're just as likely to think, how do I work with this kid in a way, and I'm talking field supervision here before they get to placement, how do I work with this kid in a way, how do I case plan with them in a way that helps develop their social capital? The people around them who are supportive adults who are not getting paid to care about them. And if they don't have any, then how risky is that kid to end up in placement? So that's the work that you need to be doing. So I'm sorry to cover that one fairly quickly, but it really, as you can tell, these themes kind of tie together pretty well. And with that, we'll do the last 3 after we come back from a 5-minute break. So it is 2:49, so let's say 2:55. We'll be back on. Yeah. On Tuesday. As usual, I lost track of time and got a little wound up, and Elizabeth, because she can't reach me, was unable to slap me. So sorry about that. But I thought that what Angel and Mendocino brought up was really important for small counties, and what Shonda brought up from Sacramento in that perspective is so helpful. I mean, that could be a class in itself. So with that, let's move along. I brought up the first 3 things that, in trying to impart our combined wisdom here that we came up with for you guys. The next ones that I want to talk about is the balance between science and art. So number 4 is adapt with science. I think one thing that's happened through the course of a lot of our careers that, those of us that have been here for a few decades is, there was a time that science wasn't really as big of a part of our business. And then it just came flooding in, right? With the EBP wave and all of us looking at evidence-based practice and frankly becoming very dismissive of some of the more ethereal things of our business, some of the more artistic sides of our business. Now that said, the science brought great value. And I think some level of objectivity to our business with things like a detention risk assessment instrument and frankly, just juvenile assessments that were dynamic in risk and needs, and things that were evolving over the last 20, 25 years that we brought into our systems that helped us evolve, that helped us look at complex trauma a little bit differently, that helped us look at mental health issues a little bit differently, and to not criminalize some of the things that frankly were just either viewed as delinquency or where we didn't know what else to do. So it helped us do some of the net widening. And I think that's really important to look at what meta-analysis has taught us, and especially with regard to placement outcomes, looking at what those outcomes have been over the years. Why would we reject that science today? Because we've now taken a step back and asked a lot of very important questions and had some very difficult conversations about the flaws in that data, and especially at the entry points of the criminal justice and juvenile justice systems. So this may sound a little bit like a political rant, but it's really more to encourage people to think in terms of balance here. Science is about progress. It is not about perfection. So we really have to make sure that we're questioning and torturing the data in the sense that we can't just accept that because we got a few scientific studies or even meta-analysis that we understand something from a causality standpoint. At the same time, science is a big part of the reason that the numbers have come down. It's the objective learning and the meta-analysis and the partnerships with criminologists that have brought us to a much wiser point than we were when I started in this business, and frankly didn't get any kind of evidence-based practice training in the early years. I really didn't know much about what the science said about how to work with people when I started in this business. When I was that 21-year-old crawling on the floor with JJ playing Simba and Mufasa, maybe that was helpful, but I have no idea, what was supposed to be happening with him from kind of a data-driven perspective. And so I think that's an important part of every system. And I don't want to lose sight of it just because it was saturated for a while and now is kind of at that tipping point of, does it fall out of favor or is this a process of refinement? So let's start with that. Adapt with science, meaning believe in science, understand that it's ever evolving process of refinement. Paul, what's the LA perspective on this? What wisdom do you have for us?
I don't know so much about my wisdom, but what I can share, thank you, Chief, is Sam, is that, the probation, Los Angeles County probation, and we're not alone, have committed ourselves to evidence-based practices and principles programs for many, many years. I remember I was driving down the street, it was like 107 degrees on a July day, and my phone rings and it's like, I'm not going to talk while I'm driving. So I pull over and I just remember somebody from one of our political offices, I'll leave it at that, saying, what do you know about EBP? And I knew that I will play that bluff. And I go, are you talking about programs, principles, or practices? What are you talking about? And they weren't quite sure what they were asking me. So we have this opportunity to educate. And I think that most of us know the name, we mentioned it earlier, Ed Latessa is not alone, but the things that we can do to put those actuarial assessments, those detention screeners, all of those things are absolutely terrific. And we have policies in place that are very prescriptive and say do this and that. Okay, and doing this and that is part of a historic kind of genetic code, if you will, for probation professionals going back when we didn't quite know as much as we know now. But, I don't know about your county. Our county has had the Department of Justice in its grill, and it's, we've had a lot of oversight lawsuits, things like that. We have grown with the times, and it's not because of those things that have caused us to do that. It caused us to move towards evidence-based programs. But when we adopted the attitude of trusting that a program that does what it's supposed to do, or an approach that you should take, that anybody here who is here should take, is going to, and I want to get into something to oversimplify this. So I'm going to keep this brief, but I'm going to have everybody, I don't want you to close your eyes, but imagine that this is, we call it the causal model of delinquency. And kind of the great overarching lens that we should look at it through is trauma, okay? Because most everybody we can assume comes to us through some kind of trauma. All of us have taken the ACEs survey or questionnaire. Most folks have experienced trauma. Our kids have experienced trauma. So, if we're, coming up with a plan for that kid, and we are putting an evidence, a program into place, then I would hope that is the scientific part of it, and mentioned earlier that that creates a framework, a large enough campus for us. And I know that that's going to be our next concept that Sam's going to lead us into. So I'm going to walk him right towards it by saying we have to match up our science with our artistic and creative ability to we're going to use both. We're going to balance it. Sam says this, and that's, I think, where we felt that this presentation's rubber would meet the road, is that there's a balance to all of this. And the better that we are balancing both sides of it, what we know and how we go about doing it, then it's really simple. I think all of us will start with our purpose and why we're here. We'll achieve the reason why we're here, the purpose of helping these kids, when we go through that, part of the scientific approach and the artistic approach. So that should move us a little bit forward, hopefully. And if there's any questions, and and it wasn't exactly linear, please call me out or throw it in the chat and ask me to clarify. But we need to balance our art and our science, is really what I'm trying to say.
We're really trying to help build perspective, and how do you build a healthy culture, right? Because ultimately, we could probably summarize this training in saying, if you have a healthy kind of progressive culture that blends the science and art, there's a good chance you're placing less kids in congregate care than you used to. And you're probably even going to the RFA placements less than you would if you're not doing that. And so on down the line, right? But hey, like I started this with, we have icons like, I'm looking into my magic mirror. We've got Sean Small in here, and Chief Tracy Neal. Tracy, good to see you. Jeremy Kenyon. I mean, I know the work that you guys have done, and it's humbling to be talking to you guys, because I've been to your departments. I know what this looks like. I know how hard you've worked to refine your systems. And frankly, not all of that came from criminology. A lot of that came from the place of a humanistic approach, where we just knew that something was off and we wanted to be better. And CCR, I think, supported us in that progress. I think we were already making a lot of changes leading up to Continuum of Care Reform. And I think Continuum of Care Reform helped us move more to a place where, even if there are, frankly, some bureaucratic elements to this and things that give me absolute headaches, and I have to call you guys and bug you about, wait, how do I do this form or that form? That kind of stuff. Ultimately, I feel much more empowered to be able to work with people and connect with people in a much more humanistic way. So when I say embrace the art of the human interaction, part of that is because when I have people like Kelli and Jeannette working with me, there is something unique about them in being able to connect with our kids and their family members. And the art of the interaction that can never be fully reduced to quantifiable methods. We can study things and say, well, we've seen correlations, and we know that if we're highly skilled in motivational interviewing, that we're less likely to do X, Y, or Z, right? And yet there's still that kind of very difficult to define art side of this to, why is it that this PO over here is able to form these incredible connections and get a kid in a juvenile detention center to have a big white piece of paper in front of them and be mapping out their history and everything that they can remember in a visual space through these family finding techniques, and saying, well, this is the first house I remember living in, and drawing it. Kelli, you want to take over for me here? Like, I think probably some of you have been through those kind of trainings, but I think it would be nice to have a 2 or 3 minute discussion on what that looks like, because I think that's important. And frankly, like, you can be trained in that, but then there's the artist's perspective of, no, I'm just going to connect with this kid in a way where I don't give up until I've gotten we've collaborated on so many connections that other people didn't get to. There's an artist's like intrinsic motivation to work with that kid in that capacity. Did I buy you the time, Kelli? You ready?
I'm ready. I think for me, with the whole family finding situation, especially when we have kids that are in juvenile hall that we think could eventually have to go down the placement route, and we're really trying to avoid that, which is what we're really big on here in Calaveras, is to just sit down at their level, no matter how long it takes, and just kind of go with them through step one to where they are today. What did the street you first lived on? What did your neighbor's house look like? What did your house look like? What's the first kind of extracurricular activity, if you ever did those? Do you remember? Is there a specific teacher, a specific person, like at a grocery store you went to every day when you were growing up and you walked down the street? What are those people that have been in this kid's life that we can rely on to be one of those social people in their lives and kind of help that kid move past what the system would be and where they would be in the juvenile justice system, and just move forward with their life that way, and even be a supportive person, even if it's not going to be a placement or things like that? What are those people that can support that person when the probation department or social services, whatever it may be, steps away?
I was going to type it in, but great, Kelly. I really appreciate that. It's such an important point that just think in terms of building social capital at every step of your juvenile justice system. I hope you all know what I mean by social capital. But, you know, who are the pro-social supportive people around this kid, including peers? Also pro-social activities that link them to other people, and what are their habits and routines? And does your holistic case planning model encompass all of those things? Are you thinking about what their life looks like outside of our system and how we help them build a better life? And so I think family engagement, family finding is a big part of that. I always like to add in family engagement because, you know, if we just think of family finding, then we think of what's codified and what the legal aspects are of that. And frankly, I'm sure there's a lot of departments that, you know, the important thing is, oh, family finding. Yeah, we sent out the letters. It's like, no. Okay, send out the letters. Yeah, you're legally required to. I get it. What are you doing to work with the kid, the family members, anybody that you can locate and connect with? How aggressively are you investing in that situation to help that kid build social capital at every step of the system? And it's never enough. Like, I am absolutely never satisfied with it. And every time I think somebody in my department has done a pretty good job with it and have a pretty good answer, then it's like these ones I'm pointing at them, like you guys can see me pointing. Jeannette and Kelli are kind of my closers, right? So it's like, all right, well, I'll send Kelli and Jeannette in there, and it kind of becomes a challenge, right? So before they're getting over there to meet with a kid, you know, you better have worked pretty hard at this. And if you haven't, then go with Jeannette and Kelli. It's not a competitive thing in the end, but it's, you know, go with them and watch what they do. You know, we've trained multiple times with Seneca and my friend Bob Friend, shameless free plug there for Bob. But, you know, Bob Friend from Seneca has come out here and worked with us. We've worked with others in making sure that we've, you know, understood the complexity of this and the hard work that goes into it, and that it is a perishable soft skill doing some of these things. This isn't something where, you know, like MI, if I ask people about motivational interviewing, well, have you done it? Oh yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did that like maybe, you know, 8-9 years ago. Well, maybe it was only 6. No, it's like, what? Then you're probably not doing it very well. You know what I mean? It's a perishable skill. Do you go to range once every 6 years? You know, this stuff is at least as complicated and nuanced and complex. And so those things take investment. Anyways, all right, sorry for the rant. But there is an art to all of that. And I think we have to embrace that. And I think we have to talk about that. I think that's a missing piece. It's like science is important. And so is the artistic aspects of our jobs and the things that maybe can't be articulated. Those sort of right brain activities that I won't go too far into neuroscience because then I'll really be ranting. But, you know, it's those things that aren't necessarily, we can't put into words of what made the difference of connecting with this kid and their family member that matter. And I think you guys should build that. And I love using the word artist because if something is work, people try to find a way to get out of it. If something is art, they find a way to want to do more of it. And, you know, corny or not, my department is full of artists. And they're all a little bit different in how they create art, and that's okay. We embrace that. I want them to have autonomy. With that autonomy, I want them to challenge themselves to know enough about the science to where they're balanced. So the balance between the art and science is, are you reading research? Are you studying? Are you listening to the criminologists? And on the other side, are you working with your team and your culture to debrief cases, to go out and watch from people who just have this magical ability to connect? And are you viewing that competitively or collaboratively, where you can go take things from the best officers? Because that's how a lot of us learned. And it's the synthesis of all of this, the more ethereal things and the more kind of left brain, strategic, incremental, linear learnings that we get from the scientists. It's the combination of that and the very difficult to describe amorphous, kind of nexus between all of that that really makes us special as a field, especially when working with kids. All right, Elizabeth, I see you jumping in there. I was going to defer to Paul, but I guess this is my I'm being naughty warning.
No, I was just giving a reminder that we have 14 minutes left for the session. So I just wanted to give a heads up. And also Shonda was sort of enthusiastically putting into the chat, sort of underscoring the importance of relationships.
Yes. Anybody want to jump in here? Paul, I'm sure you want to jump in there, right?
Well, my takeaway, it leaves me with one thought here, and that is the concept of resiliency. Okay. And resiliency is, to me, hope to you, nothing else other than the ability of somebody that is able to bounce back from adversity. And whether it's JJ as a 4-year-old or whether it's your 17-year-old that has, gang member that has a lot of antisocial leanings and beliefs in their life, that the gang is their family, that I believe that the art and science of this is the thing that can help others find their redemption, to find their hope, to find something in their life more than just being, in trouble somehow all the time, that they can be self-sufficient as adults. So we haven't talked a lot about TAY or kids in extended foster care here, but around many of our sections of the state, homelessness, we're imprisoning far fewer people. So people aren't going to spend as much time incarcerated in the future. What are we preparing people for? That art forming incorporates our belief that other people, that developing a relationship and a belief that the folks that we work with can bounce back from that adversity. And it might be trial and error. It might not be the simplest thing of all time to find out what it is, but that's where, as Sam said earlier, this is hard work. It's also the beauty of the work. So finding somebody, and everybody here has that story to tell, where you have taken somebody and helped them turn the corner in their life, where, and you know what, this is a good time. I want to see a show of hands that you have a story to tell, a success story to tell that you're really proud about. I hope I see 100%. I'm going to go through here and I'm going to look and see right now, how many of you with a hand up has a story that you can tell where you've had a success in your life or success in your career. There we go. Come on, keep it coming. You know where to find it. It's in the reactions, and just, some kid where you've had a success story and that keeps you on this job because that's so attractive. That's where your art and your science meet. It's where your brain and your heart meet. And there we go. And that is, to me, you have found that is a resilient human being that you have worked with, somebody that can bounce back. And think back to what you did when you got that person who you thought might not have been able to turn that corner did. What was it that made the difference in your life? And I would say that, yeah, your evidence-based program and your risk assessment and your court report was a part of the business. There we go, the hands, that's beautiful. Okay. But it was your heart and it was what you put into it that really made the difference in the life of somebody else. You, like was said earlier, you were probably one of the first positive and pro-social people these kids, families have ever met. And I don't know about you, but you can put your hands down, but you can put a heart up if you've ever met a kid that wanted to be a probation officer because of their interactions with you, okay? So we have that influence, and that's what we do. There we go. That's what we do. We are special. We are unique. We are about, we look at the balance, and we are the balance in the system. Let me kick it back over to whoever wants it kicked over to them. Sam.
I was just going to say real quick too, with the art piece of it, a lot of times when we look at those stories that we consider true success, it was not a clean road. It was not a smooth road. It had a lot of ups, a lot of downs. There was probably moments where we felt really discouraged, but that's a part of that journey. And if we look at it from just a simple black and white standpoint, then that's not going to be considered success. But when you look at it with their true like artistic journey through, and you see where their destination is, even if they're not exactly where they wanted to be, if they're somewhere better off, then that is success. So I think when you look at cases like that, it gives you more positivity towards, you know, those hard times when you're spending countless of hours working, you know, with these kids.
And kind of going off of that, I just wanted to add something on that. We all have some story where we definitely have seen some success and turnaround, but even in the ones where we didn't necessarily see it right away, I heard it from someone before in our juvenile hall who said, I see as our work as like planting seeds. Like we plant all these things, and as they grow up, hopefully some of the things that we've kind of helped them try to teach will eventually take up on at some point in their life. It may be not right now. We may not see some of the work that we've done in a kid's life, but maybe when they're older, they could be like, oh, this, I remember this, or I remember this technique. So even if we don't see the immediate change, like in some of our success stories, I think a lot of the little things that we do on a day-to-day basis for some of these kids goes a really long way.
You know, Angel, have any of your kids ever come back to you? Or, you know, people will come back to you years later. Thank you for mentioning planting seeds.
You know, I've actually...
They come back to you, they may come back to you. You may not see the results right now, but yeah, that's a really great point you're making. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Angel. And with respect to me and Chief Locatello, and nobody try to steal Angel or Jeannette or Kelli to your counties. They have no interest in leaving. Now you guys have great comments. Really appreciate your guys' perspective and speaking up here. We only have a few minutes left, so really quickly, the last one of the 6 things that we would say helps build a good system. Expect complexity. And I really just put this in as a reminder to not oversimplify, and to the best you can. I know how hard this work is because, this is what I do. Stave off politics and oversimplification and political extremes and ideologies. Because frankly, the kids that we work with need practical solutions, practical help. When we try to oversimplify things, we get into trouble. So expect and embrace complexity. When working with kids and with each other, I can't expect to hire somebody and 3 months later be putting them, in charge of the most difficult, youths we have that are at risk of going to placement. This is a very complicated profession. And yes, Angel, we do it for a reason. Your heart comes through when you talk, and I appreciate everything that you're giving of yourself. And I just say that in representation of all of us, because, I think when I talk about the art of the human interaction and embrace ourselves as artists, I really just want you guys to hear that. And Sean Small, I don't know why your face keeps popping up on my screen. They must know how much I love you, buddy. But for those of us that have been managing in probation for quite some time, just know that your people that are there at the line level, putting their heart and soul into this, have a really complicated job. And it's not just complicated mentally, it is complex emotionally. And we have to support them in the same way that we do the kids. And if we're not taking care of our staff, then we're not taking care of our kids. So expect complexity, and expect that part of that complication is making sure that we ask our staff to put their heart and soul on the line every day and to give more of themselves than they ever should have to, the way Kelli and Jeannette do. The way it definitely seems like Angel does, since you participated, I'll pick on you. And also expect that burnout will come, and we question whether the amount that we're giving of ourselves is worth it in the end. And when you get to the crotchety end of your career, like me, you look back and sometimes wonder, is it all worth it? And, to the day I die, it is. I don't care how much it takes from me. And at the same time, I'm going to do everything I can to take care of myself and my staff so that it's not an either or. We can take care of ourselves to take care of our kids. So that complexity, please take some time to think about that for yourselves, for the kids that you work with, for your peers that you work with, and even for the people above you to know that this is very difficult, taxing work, and I appreciate everything you guys are doing. So we've got a couple of minutes. If anybody's not completely fried, chomping at the bit to get out of here, any questions for us? Let's open it up.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say thank you. I mean, it was I took a lot from this, and the chat was just blowing up with a lot of things that other counties are doing or challenges. So I just want to say thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate it, everybody. I was very reluctant to agree to a Zoom session, and I'm happy we survived it. Oh, Chelsea, I miss you. Now I'm just going to get sentimental. There's a lot of you I haven't seen in a long time. So thank you guys for being here. Paul, last word of wisdom from you, buddy?
I just hope to see everybody the next time we can do this in person. It's really heartwarming and beautiful that you're all here today. This is hard work. Please take care of yourselves. We've gone through so much in the last year. Please just take care of you and your people, care for these kids. And I appreciate, Sam and Kelli and Jeannette and the CPOC team, and very thankful. And hopefully you leave this session with some ideas and things that you can take back with you, and hopefully some inspiration. And just appreciate that you are here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so on behalf of CPOC and all the crew helping to put this conference together, I just really, really, really want to thank all four of you for such a great discussion, and for all 100+ of you for engaging so much, particularly in the chat. This really did feel like, almost felt like an in-person session. So thank you for that. Really, really appreciate it. Quick reminder, this is the end of day 2. So please do come back and join us tomorrow for day 3. Actually, you can take Paul's advice directly in terms of taking care of yourself by logging on tomorrow at 9 a.m. for our general session, where we actually are going to be talking about self-care and wellness, and actually do some, learn some practical strategies. There might be some closed eyes. So join from a comfortable place, and we look forward to that. We'll also have another coffee and conversation with DSS, and other folks will be able to talk about part 1 of Families First. That's the coffee and conversation time, and then we'll have 2 more breakout sessions tomorrow afternoon. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.